All right, so let's first look at the differences between northern Mesopotamia and southern Mesopotamia. Northern Mesopotamia is part of the Fertile Crescent. There's enough rainfall to have agriculture there. It's what we would call dry farming zone. Um, it's based, agriculture would be based purely on rainfall. You can see the Tigris and Euphrates are a little bit further apart in this area, and that's different from southern Mesopotamia. Central and southern Mesopotamia is very dry. In some parts of central Mesopotamia, there is some rainfall. In southern Mesopotamia, there's virtually no rainfall. So the only way to have agriculture is through irrigation. It's impossible to grow crops here in southern Mesopotamia without the use of irrigation. So you've got the dry farming zone in the north, and then you have the irrigation area in the south. As we're going to see, these opportunities and constraints presented to the peoples in these different parts of Mesopotamia had a big effect on how these societies developed. All right, so we're going to look at the beginnings of the Hasuna period. That's the earliest pottery in Mesopotamia, and the pottery Neolithic of Mesopotamia. And then we'll talk about the Samarin period and culture, which is a little bit south in central Mesopotamia. And then we'll look at the Halaf culture, which also appears in northern Mesopotamia. So you could, if you move to the Halaf over here, this will all be northern Mesopotamia, Hasuna, and then Halaf. Central Mesopotamia, sort of in between these two periods, you have the development of the Samara culture. Okay, so let's look at, it's not quite Hasuna yet, the site of Dagobia. So they call it Protohatsuna, but it's pretty close. It led to the Hasuna culture. It was kind of a precursor to the Hasuna culture. It's actually in a part of northern Mesopotamia that's not very good for agriculture. It's kind of a desert region where the site is between the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's not close to either of these rivers, but it's a very interesting site. And one that shows the importance of hunting at specific sites, not all over, but at specific sites, the importance of hunting into the Neolithic time period, even with domesticated animals. It was excavated by Diana Kirkbride, you can see here, in the 60s and the 70s. So here's Dagobia right here. So it's kind of this north central Mesopotamia. You can see here's the Euphrates, here's the Tigris. It's not really close to any river. It's pretty dry. So what did they find there? They found, as we're going to see, a lot of animal bones, especially animal bones of onager. We'll talk about what that is, and also gazelle. What did the architecture look like? Well, like we've seen with many sites, you don't get freestanding buildings with the roofs on them in these Near Eastern sites. You usually get the foundations of rooms and of buildings. And what they found is this kind of cluster. It almost looks like a Pueblo from the southwest United States. You can see these kind of cell-looking rooms with no entrances, except for, obviously, it must have been an entrance on the roof. But there's no going from one room to the next through any doorways or anything like that. If you had to guess what these might have been used for, what might you guess? Wouldn't be great for a household, but they're great for storage. So it looks like a large storage facility, and then houses. Here you can see some of the houses with rooms and entryways and things like that. You can see an entryway between these two rooms. So houses, and then also large storerooms. The rooms had these large plastered basins, and they had drains. And one storeroom had 2,000 clay balls that were probably used with slings for hunting. They had wheat and barley, and they had a little bit of domesticated animals. But most of the animal bones were wild onager. And onager are essentially a precursor, a wild precursor, to donkeys. So they're kind of a wild equid. Equids are, donkeys and horses. Donkeys are domesticated. Onagers are not domesticated. So there's evidence of people hunting the onagers from paintings on the walls, but also from the bones of the onagers in the site as well. So they found something like 18,000 animal bones from the site. 70% of the animal bones were onager bones, like you can see here. So there's still onagers in northern Iran, and I think parts of northern Iraq. The kill-off, remember the survivorship curve that we looked at, the survivorship curves or kill-offs look like they were hunted because almost all the animals were full adult males. It doesn't look like they were beginning to try and domesticate the onagers. It looks like they were just hunting them. Now, when you put that together with the tools which were used for cutting and scraping and butchery, and some of these blocks and basins, what might have been going on here is a specialization at this site in the hunting of onagers, and then the use of those onagers for leather making. It looks like some of those basins were used to cure the animal skins, and because they're doing it in such numbers, and because they have trade items like obsidian from this part of eastern Turkey coming down here, this might have been a specialized kind of trading site. Some of the doorways and windows were blocked off, which shows that it might have been a seasonal settlement. So these people might have been coming here at certain times of the year, hunting onager in large quantities during the pottery Neolithic, and then producing leather and trading that leather for things like obsidian and other things that they needed. So it's, again, an interesting site. It's not typical of the time period, but it shows that in some regions and some sites, hunting continued into the Neolithic. It didn't just disappear. Most of the ceramics were pretty simple. They were coil made. You don't have the wheel until really the late Ubaid, early Uruk period, as we're going to see. That's not for another few thousand years, for another 1,000 years, 2,000 years past this point. So the earliest vessels were coil made, like you can see here. I'm sure you guys have done this. This is like a typical elementary school project or undergrad archaeology project. Okay, so this led into the Hasuna. So the Hasuna were in northern Mesopotamia. Later on, they developed into the Halaf culture, but there's kind of a similarity in this region in pottery and a similarity in architecture that allows, I would say, or based on it, archaeologists would say that there is a culture that they can identify. But we're going to talk more about this. What does the distribution of pottery actually mean? So most of the pottery becomes more complex during the Hasuna culture. It becomes painted and then also incised with these kind of hatch marks. So this is a Hasuna pot. You can see here a little bit of a jar, but you can see incised with those kind of hatch lines. Almost looks like a herringbone pattern. And then you can see geometric patterns and animal motifs on these Hasuna vessels over here. So you can see look like deer, gazelle, and other geometric patterns there. This is what a Hasuna typical house would look like. Hasuna is also, what you find a lot at Hasuna sites are clay, what are called husking trays. These are trays, large clay trays that have a very rough bottom that looks like they were used to get the husks off of grain. So you take your grain that has been threshed and removed from the stalk, and then you would rub the grain here, and the husk on the outside of the grain would come off. Okay, so now let's move down into central Mesopotamia and look at the Samarin culture. It's called the Samarin culture because it was first identified at the site of Samarra. But two of the best known Samarin culture sites are one, Teles Salon we'll look at, and then another one known as Chogamami. So the Samarin culture is around here. You can see that kind of central part of Mesopotamia. Right? Here's the Samarin culture. Hasuna culture would be kind of up here. Okay, so it's central Mesopotamia, northern Mesopotamia, southern Mesopotamia. Okay, so Samarin culture may derive from some of these Hasuna people that moved south, possibly. That's what some people believe. People who moved out of the rain-fed, dry farming areas down into central Mesopotamia. There is some rainfall. There is rainfall in central Mesopotamia, but it's too unpredictable for agriculture. So the only way that these people could survive was through irrigation agriculture. The site of Teles Salon has some of the features that are fairly typical for Samarin culture. That is the T-shaped, you can see here, houses. Also, you can see this kind of like an enclosure wall around the site. But the sort of these T-shaped houses become more elaborate over time, and they become a distinctive and common feature throughout a lot of Mesopotamian history. During Samarin culture, the pottery technology gets even better, and you see more elaborate vessels, more highly fired vessels, and a lot of different kinds of decoration. So here you can see this anthropomorphic vessel over here. You get the sort of chocolate brown painting on the sort of buff-colored pottery you can see here. A lot of the decorated pottery was found in burials or in public spaces. So it might have been a prestige good, and it also, at the same time, might have been used in feasting contexts. Whenever you find pottery in a public place, that's one of the possible interpretations. Okay, the Samarin culture at Teles Salon is interesting because it gives us some indication that we may be looking at a complex society at this point. There are very rich burials found at Teles Salon that had alabaster statuettes and also alabaster bowls. So here you can see what look like female figures and figurines, alabaster spoon over here, an alabaster tray, alabaster jars and bowls. Think about, alabaster is a fairly soft stone, but still, think of the work that was involved in carving this out by hand and then smoothing it to like a mirror fine polish, and also carving these figurines as well. The skill involved shows that there probably was craft specialization, and these might have been, prestige goods. They're alabaster is not really locally available. They were made by craft specialists, and you also find these kinds of wealth items in child burials. And as we said before, child burials with wealth might be a good indication that you have a complex society, because it shows inherited status and inherited wealth. Okay, we're going to see that there are some things from the Samarin culture that extend into the Ubaid culture in southern Mesopotamia, like the T-shaped houses, but also these kind of figurines that have these sort of coffee bean-shaped eyes and conical heads. The exact meaning behind The decoration is not entirely known. There's some speculation that maybe it's representing divinity. There's different hypotheses out there. Okay, you can see that the pottery is very highly decorated with geometric motifs and also with animal-like or animal figures. And you can see some fish here. You can see a swastika as well. Swastika is as many of you know, is a symbol that's found in many different cultures throughout time. Obviously, today it only really has one meaning that people associate with it. People will still display the swastika in India because there the association is with Hindu culture and Hindu religion more so than with Nazism. They were in World War II. Obviously, they were more focused on the Pacific theater and they were a British colony in World War II. So still today in their culture, the swastika is associated with their own culture. But I think in the United States, if you showed anyone a swastika, they would immediately think of Nazism and the Third Reich. But it was a symbol that was used in ancient Germanic cultures, which is why the Nazis picked it up. But it's also found in, as I said, in India, Tibet, Native American cultures, ancient Near East, obviously. And it could represent different things. Some people think it might have represented like a solar wheel or kind of a symbol of dividing the world into quadrants. But not surprisingly, there are many geometric shapes and forms that are common in many different cultures that people developed on their own. Another site, at Chogamami. The population, they estimate at this site, was about 1,000 people. So now we're talking about the kind of site size that's bigger than what we would expect with a tribe. Is it a chiefdom? Well, there's a little bit of debate about that, right? But these Samarin sites in general are bigger than Hasuna sites, and there are some houses within these sites that are bigger than other houses. So you have differences in site house size within Samarin sites, and Samarin sites tend to be bigger than these earlier Hasuna sites. As I said before, the only way you can have agriculture in this area is through irrigation. So you find some of the earliest irrigation canals from this time period. At Chogamami, they found irrigation canals, and at the site of Chogamami and Teles Salon, they found wheat and barley where the seeds were much bigger than seeds of wheat and barley found in northern Mesopotamia. One benefit of irrigation is the plants will actually get a little bit bigger. The seeds will get a little bit bigger because they have more access to water. So the irrigation canals at Chogamami, some people believe, are the earliest irrigation canals in the world. An important development. All right, we also see with some of the houses, you can see the Chogamami houses, you find these buttresses. Right? So these are sort of these square-like installations that stick out from on the outside, also a little bit maybe on the inside. All these houses were built with mud brick. A lot of the earlier Neolithic houses were built with mud, but not actually shaped into uniform bricks. They were built with mud piled on top of each other to form walls. That's usually known as Pise, P-I-S-E. One of the innovations in the Samarin culture was the use of molds to make uniform bricks in order to build their houses. Now you can see the buttresses here. What purpose may they have served, and why would you have a thick wall here at the base of your house? What might that mean? Well, some people think that what this means is that there was a second story on top of this house, and the buttresses give it extra strength, give the walls extra strength to support a second story. It might also have been decorative too, because you get some nice sort of shadows and nice vertical lines with these buttresses. Okay, so probably having a second story. These houses were T-shaped and they were oriented around a central place. So you can see in this larger house here, you sort of have a central place that might have been open and might have been used for larger gatherings. This is a very typical house design for Samarin culture. And also you can see the variation in house sizes here. So, in general, we've got evidence that they're trading pottery with Hasuna sites. We've got evidence of child burials with alabaster prestige goods, which might indicate a scribe status. We've got pretty large sites, about 1,000 people each. We have surplus that's probably being generated through irrigation agriculture, and fairly large house sizes. So is the Samarin culture a chiefdom? That's a good question. Or is it somewhere between between a tribe and a chiefdom? It's kind of hard to say. You might have the beginnings of a chiefdom. It's much easier to categorize these societies when it's very, very clear, when the evidence is much clearer, where there's no doubt, oh yes, this is a complex society. Samarin culture, you probably see the beginnings of it. Okay, so now let's look at the overlapping and then also extending into later time periods, northern Mesopotamian culture of Halaf.